research is endless. You really need to know when to stop and where to stop. It is also very important to manage your highs and lows because you will go through so many hardships for publishing a paper.
Have you had your research paper rejected before? Well, most researchers and PhD students have, because the truth is that the best academic journals reject 90% or more papers that are submitted. So many researchers get rejected multiple times, and this is incredibly frustrating because very often you don't even know why your paper has been rejected. And on top of that, you waste a lot of time resubmitting your papers. Initially, this was Pratik Wahi's experience as well. He had tried publishing before in one of the top journals in his field called Energy in Buildings, and his papers had been rejected 4 times until he discovered the secret ingredient. And then his last paper was published in that top journal, Energy in Building, with raving reviews from the journal reviewers and practically no changes, which is almost unheard of in the top Q1 Scopus journals. How? Well, it all started when Pratik Wahi couldn't really find any clothes in H&M that fit him very well. And in today's episode of Published Researcher, Pratik Wahi reveals the surprising truth about publishing papers in top Scopus-Indexed journals. He also shares his #1 hack that allowed him to do 6 papers during 4 years of his PhD without working 50 or more hours a week. But before this episode starts, did you know that 83.7% of those of you who watch or listen to this podcast regularly are not subscribers? So if you've enjoyed one of these episodes of the Published Researcher podcast, could you do me a favor and subscribe? It actually helps much more than you might think, because the bigger this podcast gets, the bigger the guests will get. And that means the bigger and better the tips for publishing papers in top journals will also get. So by subscribing, you will not only help this channel, but you will also help yourself and everybody else who wants to publish papers in top journals. So please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, my name is Marek Kiczkowiak, and this is the Published Researcher podcast. Enjoy this episode.
So, Pratik, since this is the Published Researcher podcast, the first question that I always like to ask every guest is, how did you publish papers? So, you've published 3 journal papers, you have 1 more under review, and you also have 2 conference papers as output of your that's quite a lot of papers for 4 years of PhD work. So how did you do this, and what does it take to become a published researcher? Well, it's a very interesting question and very common one, because when I also mention as the output of my PhD, a lot of people ask, how did you make it happen? And it has a straightforward answer, but not a straightforward journey to reach this answer. And the straightforward answer is management. And I think there are 3 types of management you have to do to become a published researcher. Is, of course, first one is research management, that you need to manage different activities and you need to plan it beforehand, considering all the various possibilities. So that's first. You need to manage your research, considering that you want to publish. So, from that perspective. Second is time management, because research is endless. You can continue doing research, but you really need to know when to stop and where to stop. And the third one is brain management. And not many people talk about it, but it is also very important to manage your highs and lows, because, you will go through so many hardships for publishing a paper. It could be from research perspective, it could be content perspective, it could be experiment perspective. Even if all of these problems are being solved, you would still have to go through this entire process of getting published by submitting here and there, getting it test rejected, and then improving it. So it's a continuous process. So during all this process, it's also important to manage your expectations and manage your brain. So I think the straightforward answer is management. But as I mentioned, it's not a
straightforward way to arrive at this answer.
It's a very interesting way of putting it, Pratik. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that and then identify these three types of management. So if we could get practical here, like how the last type of management was brain management, you call it. How do you manage that? Because I know by talking to a lot of PhD students or researchers, I know how difficult it is to manage those highs and lows. And I think some studies show that about 46%, I think it is, of researchers and PhD students feel constant stress.
Yeah.
So how, in practical terms, how do you do brain management?
Well, the very first step would be to really identify what makes you tick, or more what makes you, what aspect of publishing the research or your PhD, in fact, makes you get into this is and lows. So for me, it was. I realized very early on that I cannot store too many information at one given point. I think that's true for a lot of people. For example, if I'm reading one paper, I would immediately what important points wanted to remember as soon as I go to the next paper. So that's, I think, very common among many PhDs. So this I realized, I identified, and I solved by practicing something called as a second brain idea. So basically all your other devices, your laptop, your phone, your Outlook calendar, your Google calendar, all of these can really become like a second brain. So I just thought that, okay, my brain needs to be empty all the time to be free from all these information that I don't need to store. It should be free to get these ideas anytime, wherever I'm thinking. So the best way is to, all the things that I need to remember, I will use my devices as a second brain to just dump it there. For example, if I'm riding bike, I would double tap on my AirPods to activate Siri to, just say that, okay, write this down in my notes. Just as a practical example, on a very weird, you can get answers anytime. You can get ideas anytime. So just as an example, so just keep dumping all this information in these devices, and once a week, either it could be Sunday evening, Monday morning, anytime, whenever I feel, I would go through these and start prioritizing or refining what needs to be done with this information. And then that actually can be used to structure my week, days, or coming time in order to finish things. So that's one very important thing that I experienced about myself, that because I was not able to store so much information about my PhD, I was feeling always bogged down with this information conundrum and information paralysis. So that's one way of how I deal with it and how I try to solve it. And I mean, it doesn't work always, but most of the time it can handle, this process can handle.
Yeah, and it's I'm sure it also helps with being able to focus on then all your priority task. And it's a similar technique to what one of our other guests on the podcast, Lena Sols-Emilson, told me about. So she's a tenured professor, and she's very, very busy, and there's very little time for writing. And there are all these things on her mind vying for her attention constantly. So what she does every morning when she wakes up is she dumps all these ideas and thoughts in her journal. For half an hour or 20 minutes, she just writes everything down. And then once she's finished that, her brain is clear, and then she can start writing. And she says that's been like one of the biggest hacks that helped her to write for an hour every single morning, because you clear your mind and there is no clutter in your mind. So now you can try to focus on your priority.
Yes, exactly.
Priority task.
Exactly. And this doesn't go with everything. It actually can be applied for writing task also. If in the day I've blogged 2 hours to write, it won't be like I'm just ready to write, start writing. So you can also have this half an hour before writing to just clear your mind, put everything on wherever you want to dump, just dump it and start writing. And even during writing, you can go here and there easily. So just keep your journal or everything, anything that you use close to you while you're focusing on the very specific part of your writing. If you get any other ideas, just keep noting it down so that you can use it later. It's a very simple hack, but
Yeah,
very
but
difficult to do.
it's very powerful.
Yeah,
Absolutely, because then it's very important what you said, because then you don't interrupt your writing flow. You just quickly kind of write down this idea that popped into your mind, and then you leave it, and then you continue writing.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of your papers, if not all of them, are open access.
Yes.
Was there a specific reason that you decided to make them open access?
In my case, my university has made it possible to have it open access for everyone. So it's they want to make the research and science accessible to everyone. So that's why it's open. So it's mostly from university's perspective. But I also know that a lot of funders now also want the papers to be open access. So yeah, that was mostly the reason why it's open access. But in future, I would also continue to keep it that way. When I'm publishing outside my universities, so I would also like to keep it open access because it's really helpful.
Yeah, I've seen on my own papers that the 4 most cited papers that I have, they're all open access. And I know your research is kind of also, in many ways aimed at practitioners to renovate houses and things like that, which we'll talk about. So I think it's great because then so many more people outside of academia can also read your papers, right? And hopefully apply your research findings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, we talked about the big hack, I suppose, to write papers during your PhD, which were the 3 management strategies that you mentioned. But what was the biggest challenge, I suppose, that you had to overcome during your PhD, and what did you learn from that experience?
The biggest challenge was to write. Somebody once told me, and that actually changed everything for me, is that there is no such thing as thinking, and writing comes closest to it. And that actually changed everything for me because earlier, and you also know when we had conversation before, that I was not structured in the sense that what are my thoughts and what am I thinking about. I know kind of the end point, but I don't know how to reach there, and that's because I had no idea to navigate, and that was one of the problem early on. And when I started writing, and it's important to mention that before this I always considered that, okay, whenever I have the final outcome, then only I'll go and write. But that's something I changed in terms of thought process, that okay, writing, I can give you an architecture metaphor, that when we start designing, we just don't design like the beautiful house at once. You have a butter paper or a tracing paper. You first draw first lines, then you put another layer on it and you draw over it. So these layers and layers and layers of refinement, and then comes the final product. Similarly, it's like writing. Writing also is the same, where you cannot expect that you will have the best text on the first attempt. You have to continue writing it in layers and layers and layers, and keep looking at the same text from different lenses also. So that's when I realized this aspect of writing, and then things become easier for me, because whatever I was thinking, I was just writing, whether it's my mother tongue, whether it's English, whether it's whatever. It was only for me. So there's no judgment of anybody else reading it. So that's something as a process really helped me, because then, I can just open this notebook of ideas that, oh, I had this idea of this aspect. Maybe just look at it, think, okay, this idea still works. refine it, include it. So yeah.
Would you say that's like the biggest lesson from, publishing those papers that you would give to, the younger Pratik who's just starting the PhD process? What would you say to the younger Pratik?
I would say that start writing no matter what. In the end, it becomes a published paper, but just start writing it. Also, something that I want to advise younger Pratik is that your first paper may not come in your first year, and your first paper can come perhaps after a year or two. So relax. It's okay. It's a process. Publishing 4, 5, 6, whatever papers doesn't mean that it has to be every year. It's take time to manage it, plan it, and yeah. I think these were the things I was stressing about in the first 2 years where I had no paper published.
Yeah.
But then towards third year, I had research outputs, It was easier.
But I think, if we combine that idea that you had of like the 3 types of management, that from the beginning as well, like you plan things. And I think a lot of researchers that I speak to, they're excellent at planning lab work and experiments.
Yeah.
But somehow when it comes to planning the writing, it usually takes a back seat, maybe because people don't like it for different reasons. So, managing that and planning that, and also that idea of just write, like you said, like, you can't build a beautiful house, just in one go.
Exactly.
You have to build the fundaments. You have to build some walls. Maybe you have to tear a wall down and build a different wall. It's a process. But if you don't write, you're not starting that process.
Exactly.
We mentioned, a little bit like the stress that comes with publishing papers, and how you try to manage it. And yes, studies show that I think over 40% of PhD students are constantly stressed. So was your PhD stressful as well, Pratik?
I think it's fair to say that every PhD is stressful, but what stresses could be different. Like in my case, I think I'm very lucky to have very good mentors. My supervisory team is amazing. I had no financial restrictions in the sense because I got a paid PhD position, so everything was covered. So, but I also know that a lot of people have these kind of stresses as well. So I feel from that perspective, I'm lucky. But of course, there are other kind of stresses which are mostly related to your own capability. In my case, I think imposter syndrome is a real deal among PhDs, and it was also a big thing during my first year with me, where I came with flying colors from my master's studies, starting my PhD, thinking that, it's the same process. It's just 4 years.
It's going to be a piece of cake.
Yeah. But no, it's mostly like this Dunning-Kruger effect, where when you have little knowledge, you have higher confidence. But as you read more, you know more, your confidence actually is inversely proportional to that knowledge. So it's like, it was like that. So I was dealing that kind of stress where how do I not feel that that I'm an imposter? And I think
how
the
did
other
you deal with that? Because that is an issue that I hear time and time again. Even from researchers already who finished their PhD, that they feel they're not good enough in be it related to writing or other areas. How did you deal with that?
I think it doesn't fully go. You can only manage it. There are, of course, instances even now when I feel that perhaps I'm an imposter. But you can manage it. And in this, your surroundings, your environment, your people, your peers, your supervisor helps a lot. I remember that I told my supervisors that I don't think I'm adding anything to the scientific. I don't have any scientific contribution because the topic I'm working on has been dealt in other countries. and things like that. And I think this is something which a lot of people feel that what we are adding to the scientific world, right? And I still remember that my supervisor said one line which really calmed me down, and I still thankful for them to help me understand that. And they said that it's okay to feel that way. I think we are, as a community, as a human community, we are so much far ahead in research that it's extremely difficult to find new problems. But but there's always new context. The problems remains the same, and that's what we are solving now. I think that was such an interesting advice or explanation that they gave, that they acknowledge it, and they understand it, and it really helped me. So that's one example of how your peers, your supervisors, your group can help you support that. But you can only manage it. You can never. I feel
Absolutely.
you can
Absolutely.
never get rid of it once you have it.
Yeah. And what you said about the scientific contribution. Yesterday, I was reading about the crisis of replicability in science. You know, that most journals are interested just in novel things. They don't want studies that replicate other studies. Sure. And you'll probably never get any big funding and win any big grants if your study is just a replicability study. So therefore, you know, we have very few studies that actually try to replicate results. So therefore, you might have theories that are backed by like one or two studies, and then nobody bothered or could replicate them, which is a shame, because I mean, you should be replicating those studies, because the fact that, for example, you know, you found something and you have some results, well, doesn't necessarily mean that that's true yet. You know, you do need quite a lot of research and replication to confirm an idea. So I think that is a big issue. So perhaps if, you know, those of you listening, you know, if you're thinking, well, my idea isn't novel, I'm kind of doing something similar, but that is a contribution that I think you're refining what other people have done and you're replicating those results. And maybe it's going to turn out that that theory just doesn't work in your context, you know, and you find something new. So that's important as well to remember. Why do you think, you know, so many PhD students and researchers feel stressed, overwhelmed, burnt out? I mean, you mentioned some issues like, you know, like, for example, funding, maybe, you know, the relationship with the PhD supervisor. But I'm also wondering kind of what role does, you know, being far from home play? So, you know, you came to the Netherlands from India, and, you know, it's a different culture, different language, different everything.
If you're listening to this and thinking, I also want to publish more papers in better journals while working less, well, then we can show you a proven system to publishing 3 or more papers every single year without journal rejections. It will allow you to publish in top journals, make a real impact with your research, and become the go-to authority in your field. And I'm sharing the whole system with you for free. The link is right in the description. It's already helped hundreds of other PhD students and researchers. Jean-Paul Sebastian wrote 5 papers in 4 months. Cathy Wong published 2 papers in Q1 journals. Lisette Britz published 3 papers. 4 more are under review, and she's working on 4 more papers. And Lina Soros-Emilsson got tenure. If you want similar results, if you want to publish in top Scopus-Indexed journals, then you can get the whole Publish Researcher system for free, and the link is right in the description.
What role does that play in, you know, in the stress overwhelm factor?
I think it plays a huge role, because in the end, you are doing a job. To all the listeners, PhD is not studies; it's a job, and treat it as a job.
And to all the universities listening to this, pay your PhD students well. I know your PhD study was paid for, but in many countries it isn't very well paid. So if you're a university listening to this, pay your PhD students well.
Yes. So it's a job. And with any job, when you go to a new company, in this case, university or country, university in a different country, you definitely have this cultural shock. Of course, from the perspective of settling into that environment, but also the work culture. So I come from India, and I think the most Indians, or most Indians, I would say, does not understand the concept of work-life balance because we have never seen it. In India, when I was working, there is a deadline and there are time. I have to finish that deadline, and doesn't matter if I exceed that time, because I have to give everything to achieving that deadline. And there are many reasons for it. But when you come here, it was such a big work cultural shock to me that, okay, yeah, people do take breaks. People don't answer your calls after 5 p.m. or they don't, they come and then they sit at 8 or 9 and they continuously work with perhaps a half an hour break in which they go out, walk, come back, and then they continue working. So it was very interesting for me to see it. Even though I came to Netherlands for my master's, I had 2 years of developing this work culture before I could start my PhD. But I think that work culture really helped me during my tenure, my candidature. So I think that plays a lot of role, because if you're coming from India where there is no concept of work-life balance, you would end up making your doctoral studies as your life. Then if somebody asks, if one day somebody takes away your doctoral study, then you would be nothing actually, because you've given your life, your day, you made it your life. So I think that's not nice. It's just a part of your day or your 4 years, and that's it. Who are you outside this PhD is also really important. Also important for you as a researcher to, just not be confined in that field, but also to go out, see, experience things. I think that's what cultural, or going into a different country, working there plays a role. For me, it played it that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that, again, research shows that, most PhD students work like 50 or 60 hours a week, and early career researchers do as well. But what you said about the PhD being a job, or, if you're a researcher already, it's just a job. It doesn't have to consume your entire life necessarily. So how did you manage that and not allow the PhD to consume every waking hour of your day and life?
I think, the second brain thing that I mentioned in the beginning really helped me that way, because then I had time and space to think about other things than my work. But for first 3 years, I think it was okay to manage. And towards the end, last 6 months, like beginning of this year, it was really, really intense. So I gave up everything and gave everything to my PhD, because I knew that it's not a relay race. It's not a marathon. It's a sprint of 6 months. So I think that's understandable. But until last three and a half years, I was pretty much managing things in 40 hours a week and doing other things apart from my PhD, in order to just also relax and give space to something else, which most of the time was really helpful for my own good, because I was getting ideas somewhere else by looking at some other things, like, okay, perhaps I can try this, or talking to other people. Yeah. So yeah, that's perhaps, how I managed.
Yeah. And I think what sometimes a lot of people forget about is that, rest is actually, it helps your productivity. You can achieve much more in 4 hours when you're rested than in 8 hours when you're burned out.
Yeah.
And then, going away for a weekend and just like disconnecting has been proven by so many studies just to give you great ideas, help your creativity, improve your mood, help you focus better. It's just good for everything, really.
Yeah.
And I think, there is this idea in some countries that we just need to work more and more and more and more and more to achieve whatever it is that we want to achieve. But I think, keeping that balance and working less can actually allow you to achieve more in many ways and feel more chill. So I want to come back to the papers that you wrote, those journal papers and the conference papers. Which of them do you feel most proud of?
Yeah, the last paper that I published very recently, actually, in August, I'm really proud of that paper. Why? Because I think after 2 years or 3 years of battling this idea that my scientific contribution is not new, I found a very interesting problem that I wanted to solve, and it got me excited again. And I gave everything to it, and I learned so many new things. I picked up so many new skills that in order to arrive at an answer, that be it thermal simulations or machine learning and all of these buzzwords, I actually went into it and learned all of these skills to support my research. And in the end, it came out such a nice study that I submitted it to a very well-known journal in my field called Energy in Buildings, very high impact factor. And I've been rejected from this journal for the other 2 papers. This is my 3rd paper that I'm talking about. The other 2 papers I've been rejected twice or thrice. So in total, I've been rejected from this journal 4 times. Just like any other, I submitted this paper again to this journal because,
Yeah, and I'm sure the editor again. So, Pratik, give me a break, man. I've already rejected you 4 times. Why are you even trying?
My previous paper have been also desk rejected, so that's not a very nice feeling to have. But anyway, so I submit this paper. After 2 days, I receive a notification that the paper is now sent to reviewers. So at least it's not desk rejected. So like, okay, I think editor must have seen some merit in the paper. And then I waited for 3 months as the review process go, and I received one email from the journal that, okay, your review process is done and here are the comments. And I was very, like, oh my God, perhaps another rejection. But to my surprise, the first sentence was, congratulations, we are accepting your paper with minor revisions. And then, so that's good. And then when I see the comments were like, reviewer 1 said, this is such an interesting research, very much novel, and you did a very complex study. My only recommendation is to add another graphic for the readers to understand. And the second reviewer said something similar without saying anything to add. And that's it. So practically it was a direct acceptance to this journal that I have been rejected 3 times, 4 times. And I mean, I would consider it as direct acceptance because it was minor revision only because they said that to add one graphic.
Yeah, because they had to. Like, I mean, let's be honest. Like, a reviewer has to say something. They can't just say it's perfect. But it was, wow, that's really impressive. So what was that? Because you said that, like, you finally had this, like, great idea and this problem that energized you to write the paper. And it was, apart from the fact that you probably wrote the paper very well, it was probably that idea and that problem, So what was that? Tell us about that idea and tell us, like, how you came up with it.
Yes. And there's a very short story behind it. And I think this is where a lot of the listeners would have, it will be clear of what I meant that you need to do other things. My research is about finding renovations for energy transition. Like, if you want to get rid of gas, then the house need to be ready for this transition. Usually, the suggestions that are given in order to renovate a house is based on these archetypes, representative houses that have been statistically made. So for if there are 4 types of houses that exist in Netherlands, there are 4 types of these representative houses. So you do your studies on these representative house and give advice. But it's not very helpful because this representative house are a statistical average of all the variations that can exist in houses. So then the idea is that perhaps we should study these variations and then come up with the renovation solution that addresses these variations. So that's the idea, a very high level overview of the idea that I'm mentioning right now. But what is interesting is how I got this idea. I had to go present conference. Was it a conference? Anyway, I had to go somewhere, and I wanted to buy clothes, and I went to H&M, and I was looking for my sizing, like small, medium, large, XL, and all these sizes, and none of it were fitting me properly. And then I thought that I can't go to a tailor and get it bespoke because it's going to be too expensive for me. Because coming from India, having a tailor is very much affordable and accessible. But that's the idea that there I got the eureka moment that perhaps all these small, medium, large, XL sizes are these representative archetypes that people study. But it is largely on a very large population, it fits. But for the perfect fit of a clothing, you have to go to a tailor, right? So that's the idea that I got, and I was like, I need to analyze this, and that's
Beautiful. Love it. Love it.
Story.
And I love the simplicity here, because it's like what you mentioned is, it's just, I know that there are a lot of complicated statistical details in it and it's a complicated study, but like the overall idea is very simple. Like there are these archetypes that we've been working on, but they don't really represent the reality. And it's interesting that for so many years, all researchers have been following this trend, and nobody actually realized that there is, there's something else that perhaps we should be investigating. And I think that might be a common thread sometimes in academia, that, somebody has this idea, like with the archetypes. I'm sure somebody invented this idea, and then other researchers started flocking to it. And it's a good idea, and they started researching.
Yeah.
And it happened for such a long time that it kind of establishes a status quo, doesn't it? And then when you're new to research, when you're starting out, it's like, well, that's what I should do because everybody else is doing it. Who am I to, you don't even realize that there are other avenues. So I think, it's a very, very powerful message as well for how to come up, I suppose, with interesting ideas that get you to those high impact journals.
Yeah, and everything was same. The problem is still the same. The context is still the same, but how you approach the problem became different. And it was really interesting because, I don't know, the subconscious mind has a way of working in some way that everything converged when I came up with this idea, because this was my third paper. And I look back at my first paper, which was about literature review, and I found that many authors in my field are actually using archetypes. So then I could directly connect this idea that, hey, in my first paper, I found this gap that everyone is using archetypes, but perhaps we should not do it. And that became such a nice connection. And I felt amazing. You see, I mean, this gave me so much energy and power to, I have to address it and I have to do it. That Absolutely. I feel for all these reasons, I'm very proud of this study, and especially how it turned out as a publication. When I got those comments that after working on it for 1 year, and then the reviewers also say and agree, for whom I have never met, that this is a very interesting and good study. I feel that if you give me PhD at this particular moment, I'll be happy to take it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess, everybody listening, you should just go to H&M and see what ideas you get in H&M. But no, it comes back. I think it ties into what you said about, taking breaks, being interested in other things. Like, I mean, the best paper that I've ever done in like the highest impact factor in my field that I've ever published is very similar to that. The idea is like kind of simple, but it's something that nobody else had thought about before. And then the comments that I got from that journal were very similar to yours, that like, can you change this paragraph and put a comma here and add this table, basically? Because the idea is there, and that's why they want to publish it. That's beautiful. But tell us a little bit more about these ideas. I know you work on, using lower temperatures to heat houses. And what temperatures are we talking about? Because, low temperature kind of brings in my mind, that I'm going to be very cold at home in winter. So what are we talking about?
Yeah. So I think when the first energy transition happened, not first, but the last energy transition that happened from coal to natural gas. So all of the heating dominated countries have these natural gas boilers in their homes that generate hot water, and then this hot water is circulated through radiators, and then these radiators gives off heat that actually comforts us.
So just to interrupt, what countries are we talking about? Is it like Northern Europe or?
I would say, let's talk about Netherlands now.
Okay.
It's a heating dominated country, so that's how traditionally heating works here. So this temperature of this water, that is the hot water that's generated in the gas boiler and then circulated in your radiators, has a temperature level of about 90 degrees. And if you think about it logically, it's a little counterproductive because you're heating water at 90 degrees to heat your room at 21 degrees. So there's a lot of this exergy losses. You're wasting valuable resource such as natural gas for heating your room at 21 degrees. So that's I think the logic of why perhaps we should go lower temperature. Like you don't need to heat your water circulating in your radiators at 90 degrees. Perhaps it can be only 50 or 40, even 35. So that's what I meant by lower temperature. And you're absolutely right that as soon as I say lower temperature, the idea of thermal comfort of you as an occupant feeling comfortable in your home comes into picture, because the radiator capacity with which it can heat a space reduces drastically when you reduce the supply temperature of 90 degrees. And that's because all the radiators in existing buildings were made for 90 degrees. So if you reduce the temperature, the heating output also reduces and your home would be less heated. And that's where we need to prepare these existing houses. And that's where I'm researching on that. How can we prepare the existing houses for these lower temperatures so that the occupants can continue to have comfortable heating inside, while we can get rid of natural gas, while we can reduce the supply temperature. And then as soon as you reduce the supply temperature, then you don't need natural gas boiler to heat the water. You can use sustainable sources that could be waste heat from industry or geothermal energy, because you don't need to heat your water at such a high temperature. So that's the entire idea of the research that I'm working on.
Okay. And then I suppose you also need to combine that with insulating those houses better, right? Because if the temperatures are lower, and I don't know what the houses are like in the Netherlands, but when I lived in the UK, those terraced brick houses from, the 60s or whenever they're built, coming from Poland, those houses in the UK were terribly insulated. I remember one winter in York, it wasn't even cold because, UK is not as cold as Poland, but, let's say it was 5 degrees Celsius. I had water dripping on the window inside because it was a single glazed window, whereas in Poland you would have 2 now triple glazed windows, right? Yeah. So I'm wondering if that also comes into play, that you have to, I suppose, replace the windows, insulate the houses better. Is that something that's...
Yeah. In fact, there are many things that you could do at building envelope level, so that of course you can insulate your facade, your walls, your roof, your floor. You can change windows. You can perhaps also install better radiators. You can change your ventilation system so that you don't lose out the hot heat via ventilation. So there are these so many things that you could do, and that's where my product, or the outcome of my thesis was established, is that you have these so many options to do. Maybe I can give another example that I got while not working on PhD.
While in H&M, please do. Yeah.
No. This time it was a restaurant.
We're not connected to H&M, by the way. It's not a pitch for H&M. No. There are no links in the description. No coupon codes, nothing like that.
Yeah. So this example is, I was with my PhD colleagues, and we wanted to, have dinner. So we went to a random restaurant, and we were very hungry, worked very hard on our PhD, and we were very hungry, as they would say. So we went to this restaurant, and we looked at the menu, and the menu had like 100 different options. And we were getting frustrated what to order because I'm really hungry. And I think all of us must have gone through this phase or this experience. So just translating it, that this particular thing that you experienced is called as decision paralysis, that there are too many options that you just were not able to, select which one is appropriate for me. I think you don't have to go to a restaurant to experience this. You can experience it with a Netflix also. Like you don't know what to watch, So that's classic decision paralysis, and that's exactly what happens when you want to the problem, now you want to renovate it, but the decision paralysis is that there are too many options to do, and I don't know which one works the best for me. Especially if you're looking at archetype buildings, that also you don't know if it's going to applicable to my own house. So that's perhaps the outcome of my PhD, where I ended up, summarizing all this information, and then how can we use this different information sources and renovation solutions to come up with a decision-making framework that can help you find the solutions that are most appropriate for your context.
And just before I ask you about that framework, can you just excuse me for 1 minute? We'll cut out this part, but somebody is knocking on the door here of the co-working space. So I just want to see what's going on. Just 1 second. And then we'll cut out this. Sorry, I'm back. Yep. So there is the decision framework that you developed, but if we can get practical for anybody listening there who maybe owns a house somewhere in the Netherlands or in a part of the world where you need to heat your house and it's an old house. What do I do? Is it possible? How do I simplify the decision process? How do I make that decision about renovating?
Yeah. So in very simple terms, you could follow 4 steps. First, we need to find if you need renovation, because most of the time we don't know if I need it. Perhaps my house is most recently built and I already have good insulation, and maybe I don't need renovation. So first, it's important to find out if your house is ready for this transition. And if not, then we can diagnose your building to see what are the critical areas that needs improvement. Once we know these critical areas, then we can go about finding the solutions that can be implemented in these critical areas, depending on how old your building was, whether you have space to install something or not. So it's very simple. Just know if you need renovations, then what is possible, what is feasible out of those possible solutions, and what would you desire out of those feasible solutions. So 4 steps, simple.
Nice. Nice. Great. And if, you could now write a paper about anything that you wanted, maybe you don't want to write paper because you're just tired after the PhD and you want to take a break. But assuming you do, and like you could write a paper about anything right now, what would that be? What would that next idea from H&M that really energizes you be?
Could be interesting. So, very recently, coming from India, there are these many, how do you say, omen? I don't know if you also have these bad omens, good omen.
Right. Like signs.
Black cat crosses
Absolutely.
the street.
Yeah, it's an omen. Yeah.
So my mother told me something, and then I kind of got into an argument with her regarding why it doesn't apply now. So it just made me curious that perhaps these omens or signs had some origin. So what was that origin, and does it still apply now? Just to demystify the idea of whether these signs actually helpful or not. Or, so that's something. If I could write on anything, and if I have time, that's something I would like to explore.
Interesting. Yeah, because I do wonder where they come from. I mean, in many European countries, I think most of those omens are the same. I don't know if they would be the same in India, but like, a black cat crossing in front of you, don't go under a ladder, those kind of things. And they're the same in Poland, in the UK, in the Netherlands,
exactly. Yeah.
So and maybe there is an origin.
Yeah. And then some of these signs could be contextual, regional, but then many of so that could be explained because of the geographical or contextual location. But then there are these signs like the black cat one. It's very much global. So then
is it the same in India?
Yeah, I don't know. How did it arrive? Who started it? And just to map and what was the
why do you hate black cats? Black cats are nice.
So just
very interesting. Yeah, I want to thank you as well, Pratik, for this conversation, because I learned a lot from it, and like my big takeaway that I want to remember from this conversation is this: it's the H&M. Is these eureka moments, where you're doing something completely unrelated to your research, and your subconscious somehow it's been working. And then you have this one moment where it's like, now I know what I'm going to do, and it's beautiful when you have those moments. And it's so important, I suppose, to cultivate that time to have those moments, because if you work 60 hours a week, evenings, weekends, you will never have those moments. Yeah. So thanks again for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for inviting me. I always like participating or giving it back to academic English now, because it helped me so much to learn about myself and my writing skills, improve my writing skills. So I'm really happy. And yeah, thank you again.
If you're listening to this and thinking, I also want to publish more papers in better journals while working less, well, then we can show you a proven system to publishing 3 or more papers every single year without journal rejections. It will allow you to publish in top journals, make a real impact with your research, and become the go-to authority in your field. And I'm sharing the whole system with you for free. The link is right in the description. It's already helped hundreds of other PhD students and researchers. Jean-Paul Sebastian wrote 5 papers in 4 months. Cathy Wong published 2 papers in Q1 journals. Lisette Britz published 3 papers. 4 more are under review, and she's working on 4 more papers. And Lina Soros Emilson got tenure. If you want similar results, if you want to publish in top Scopus-Indexed journals, then you can get the whole Published Researcher system for free, and the link is right in the description.